Wyoming Territory, September 1883. The wind screamed through the cottonwoods as Beatrice Dunning ran barefoot through the dark, her breath coming in hard, broken pulls. Somewhere behind her, the door to the ranch house still swung on broken hinges, and above it the stars blinked cold and sharp. She had waited until midnight just like she always told herself she would. Her husband had passed out half-drunk and mean after slamming her against the wall hard enough to make her ears ring. This time, she did not wait for morning. She did not wait for the bruises to fade or for the lies to start again. She slipped out with nothing but her threadbare shawl, a canteen, and a small canvas bag of coins she had hidden under the floorboards 4 months back. Her heart pounded louder than her footsteps. She did not cry. Not when she sliced her foot on a jagged stone. Not when the coyotes howled in the distance. Not even when she thought of her baby girl buried beneath the cottonwood tree behind the house lost 2 winters ago because her husband had refused to ride for the doctor. Beatrice had stopped crying a long time ago. She moved toward the tree line where the hills rose black against the stars. She knew if she kept heading west, she might reach the old stage trail by dawn. Maybe find a settler or a trader. Maybe someone kind. But the land had other plans. A root caught her ankle and she went down hard on her knees. The canvas bag slipped from her grip and tumbled into the brush. She crawled after it, hands shaking, when she heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind her. She froze. A shadow stepped from the trees, tall and silent. She scrambled backward, heart jumping to her throat. "I will not hurt you," the voice said calmly. It was a man's voice, deep and steady, and not like her husband's at all. It was quiet, like he had no need to raise it. Moonlight filtered through the trees and struck his face. He was Lakota, his long black hair tied back, his expression unreadable. He wore a woven sash across his chest and carried a bow slung across his back. A rifle, too, though it stayed untouched at his side. Beatrice tried to speak, but her throat caught. Her hands trembled around the canvas bag. "You are bleeding," he said, nodding to her foot. "I am fine," she rasped. "I just need to keep moving." "You will not make it far," he said. "Not like this." She looked at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes. She had no reason to trust anyone. Not after all these years. But something about him. He was still, like the land itself. Watching. Listening. "What do you want?" she asked. He shook his head once. "Nothing." She swayed, suddenly dizzy. "Sit," he said, gentler now. "I cannot stay here. He will come after me." The man looked toward the east, toward the distant ranch house. Then back at her. "He will not find you." Her breathing hitched. "How do you know?" "I will make sure of it." She looked at him for a long moment, then sank to the grass. Her legs gave out anyway. He knelt beside her and pulled a small pouch from his belt. He poured water over her cut, then wrapped it with cloth torn from the hem of his own shirt. His movements were careful, respectful. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harlan Menneedes," he said, tying the cloth tight. "And you?" "Beatrice Dunning." His hand stilled for a moment on her ankle. Then he nodded. "Beatrice." The way he said it made her chest tighten in a way she did not understand. He helped her to her feet, careful not to touch her more than he had to. "My camp is close. You will rest there." She hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" Harlan looked at her, then really looked at her, like he was seeing what no one else had taken the time to see. "Because someone should have." Beatrice followed him through the trees, limping, her hand gripping the strap of her shawl. The stars shone bright overhead and the wind carried the scent of pine and earth. For the first time in years, the night did not feel like a trap. By the time they reached his camp, nestled in a grove of pines beside a creek, her knees were shaking. Harlan helped her sit near the fire. He handed her a blanket without a word and turned to fix something over the flames. Tea. Maybe. Something warm. The scent of sage drifted through the air. Beatrice wrapped the blanket around herself, watching him. He moved with quiet grace, as if the forest bent to make room for him. "Thank you," she said softly. He glanced at her. "You are safe now." The words almost broke her. She stared into the fire. "He was going to kill me one day. I could feel it." Harlan did not speak, but his jaw tightened. I stayed. Because I had nowhere else. He made sure of that. You left, Harlan said simply. That is what matters now. She looked at him through the firelight. Why are you alone out here? I scout for the army sometimes. Guide settlers through the Black Hills. But I live here. On my own. No family. He shook his head once. They are gone. The fire crackled between them. Beatrice reached her fingers toward the warmth, her shoulders slumping as the adrenaline drained out of her. You should sleep, Harlan said. I do not know how. He nodded slowly. You will. She laid down near the fire, the blanket tucked around her. Harlan sat with his back to a tree, his rifle across his lap, eyes on the dark. Beatrice watched him through half-lidded eyes. She did not understand him yet, not his silence, not his stillness, but something about him made her feel less like she was floating in the dark. And when she finally drifted off, it was the first time in years her dreams were not filled with shouting or fists. It was just the stars above and a man who had not looked at her like a burden. Just a man who had said she was safe. And made it true. Dawn pressed pale light through the trees when Beatrice stirred. The blanket still rested over her shoulders, the fire gone to ash but the embers warm. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache, but nothing throbbed. Harlan was gone from the spot beneath the pine, though his bow and rifle remained leaned against the trunk. She sat up slowly, brushing the hair from her face. Her foot was stiff, the wrapped cloth stained with dried blood, but the pain had dulled. She reached for her canteen, only to find a steaming tin cup beside it, filled with something that smelled of sassafras and pine needles. She took a cautious sip, strong, bitter, not unpleasant. A rustle beyond the creek caught her attention. Harlan stepped through the willows with a pair of rabbits slung over his shoulder. His steps were deliberate, as though he'd spent years learning how to make the world quiet around him. He didn't speak as he set to skinning the animals, but when she moved to help, he handed her a knife without hesitation. You ever done this? He asked, his voice rough with the morning. No, she admitted. He didn't offer instruction, only cleaned his own with practiced hands and let her mimic him. Her fingers shook at first, but she kept at it, jaw tight with concentration. When she nicked herself, he passed her a strip of clean cloth but said nothing. Once the rabbits were roasting, she sat beside the fire and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Harlan crouched to adjust the spit but didn't sit. You don't talk much, she said finally. I talk when there's something worth saying. She glanced at him, unsure if that was meant to chide her. He didn't look at her, just watched the flames. You were right, she said. I wouldn't have made it far. I know. She turned her eyes to the creek where a few birds scratched along the bank. I thought about leaving so many times. Always ended up staying. Telling myself I could manage. That it wasn't as bad as it was. Harlan didn't interrupt. Then one night I looked up from the stove and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed. The fire popped. He shifted his weight but still didn't speak. I'm not asking for pity, she said. I didn't offer any. That made her mouth twitch almost into a smile. Where do you go when you're not here? North, mostly. Sometimes across the Bighorns. I ride with male drivers. Keep to myself. You trust them? No. But I know what they want. That makes them easier to move around. And me. He met her eyes for the first time that morning. I haven't figured you out yet. Beatrice looked back at the fire. Maybe there's nothing left to figure. Harlan rose, checked the meat. That's not true. After they ate, he doused the fire and packed his rifle. She tied her shawl across her shoulders like a sling, slipped the coin bag into its folds. There's a wagon trail a half-day west, he said. Runs through the canyon before it splits toward Fort Washakie. You're taking me there? I'll walk with you as far as the ridge. She nodded. Thank you. They walked in silence, the trees thinning as the land opened into rolling foothills. Her limp slowed them, but Harlan never outpaced her. He paused now and then to listen, not to her, but to something in the distance whined through the brush, a bird's sudden hush. She didn't ask what he heard. She didn't need to. When they reached the rise, the wind picked up. Below them stretched a long ribbon of trail, 2 wagon ruts carved into the earth cutting west toward the mountains. Beatrice stared down at it, then at the empty blue beyond. I don't know where to go. Harlan crouched and drew a line in the dirt with a stick. You follow this bend. The station's near the fork. There's a freighter's widow who keeps a place just off the trail. She's got a strong back and a good eye. She'll take you in. Why would she? Because I'll ask her to. Beatrice folded her arms. And what will you do? I'll go east for a time. Scout work near the Platte. She hesitated, then said, would you come back? Harlan studied her face. Do you want me to? She didn't answer right away. The wind lifted her hair. He waited. I don't know who I'm going to be when I stop running, she said. But I think I'd like to find out with someone who doesn't expect me to be small. He nodded once. Then I'll come back. Beatrice looked at the trail, then at him. How long? When the leaves fall. She reached into her shawl and pulled one coin from the bag. It was old and worn smooth at the edges. She pressed it into his palm. So you come back with something of mine. Harlan didn't close his hand around it. He just looked at her, and there was something steady in his eyes she hadn't known she needed until that moment. She turned toward the trail. He watched until she was nearly gone from view. Then, without a word, he turned back toward the trees. The first frost came early that year. By late October, the aspens had turned brittle gold in the folds of the Wind River Range, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke and coming snow. Harlan rode alone along the ridgeline, his horse picking its way through stony ground dusted in white. He had not seen another soul in 3 days, but he was not looking for just anyone. He rode with a blanket roll, dried venison, and a letter folded tightly into the lining of his shirt. He'd kept it for weeks before setting off, written in a woman's careful hand, the ink pressed deep into the paper like she'd needed to make the words stay. He dismounted near the edge of the canyon and led his horse down toward the trail fork. The station came into view just past midday. It stood plain and square-backed against the slope, a low building with smoke curling from its chimney and a corral half full of tired stock. A boy about 10 was chopping wood along the fence line. Harlan tied his horse, nodded once to the boy, and stepped onto the porch. The door opened before he knocked. Beatrice stood framed in the light, her hair braided back, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a streak of flour on her wrist. She didn't speak, just looked at him for a long moment, her chest rising with a breath too deep for surprise. You came sooner than I thought, she said. The snow's early. She stepped back to let him in. The room was warm with firelight and the smell of baking apples. A kettle hissed gently on the stove. 2 quilts were folded on a bench near the hearth, and a half-mended shirt lay across the table, needle-threaded and waiting. I didn't know if you'd find the place, she said, pouring a tin cup and handing it to him. I asked the right questions. She brushed her hands on her apron, and Saturday, Eda's been kind. She lets me trade baking for board. I've been sewing for the freighter's men, too. Their pockets are all holes. Harlan leaned against the frame of the door, cup in hand. You look different. I feel it. He looked at her, then not just at her face, but the way she sat, her shoulders no longer coiled tight, her hands steady even when still. I sleep through the night now, she said. That hasn't been true since I was 17. Has it been hard? I've learned how to mix feed, how to mend a wagon axle, how to make bread rise without a proper oven. Some days that's enough. He nodded once. And the man came looking. Didn't find me. Harlan set his cup down. What happened? Eda told him there was no Beatrice here. He believed her. She met his eyes then. She said the way I looked at the hills told him more than anything she could have said. I would have stopped him. I know. He walked to the fire, held his hands over the heat. I brought something. From his coat, he pulled a small leather pouch and handed it to her. She opened it and smiled faintly at the dried red berries inside. Chokecherry. From my sister's old grove. South of the tongue. I pass it when I ride east. She touched one of the berries with her thumb, then looked back at him. You remember things that matter. I do. They sat quiet for a time. The fire cracked softly, and outside, a raven called once, then again. She rose and crossed the room to stir the pot on the stove, then turned. You still ride alone? I don't have to. She watched him. I've been wondering if I'd even know how to share a life that wasn't about surviving. You would, he said. She came closer and stood with the firelight between them. I know how to work. I know how to keep quiet and endure. But I want something else now. Something that doesn't feel like waiting for everything to fall apart. He reached out, slow and sure, and touched her hand. Then let's build something that won't. Her fingers curled into his, just enough to hold. I don't have much, she said. I don't want much. Just you. The kettle whistled louder, but neither moved. I kept the coin, he said. The one you gave me. I hoped you would. I think I could stay a while, he said. If you'll have me. She nodded, voice low. I want you to stay. He stepped forward then, and she leaned into him, her head resting against his chest like it belonged there. He held her without urgency, without fear, like he had all the time in the world. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass, soft as breath. Inside, the fire warmed the room, and the crack of the wood stove was the only sound. Beatrice closed her eyes and let it be real, not a dream, not a moment stolen from fear, but something steady. Something she could choose. And she did. The snow came gently that evening, and by morning the world outside the station wore a hush of white. Beatrice stood at the window, her hands drying against her apron, the steam from the kettle curling past her face. Harlan had gone out early to check the fence line, but she saw him now walking back through the drifts with a lantern in one hand and a length of wire in the other. His coat was dusted with snow, his steps careful. She opened the door before he reached it, letting the warmth spill out. 2 posts leaning, he said, setting the lantern near the hearth. Some elk passed through last night. Heavy tracks. Nothing broken? Not yet. He unwound the scarf from his neck and hung it on a peg. She poured a second cup from the kettle and handed it to him. You hungry? Always. They ate together at the table with the window fogged behind them. Beatrice broke a biscuit in half and passed it across. Harlan accepted it with a nod, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. She didn't pull away. I got a letter from my cousin in Cheyenne, she said. She's got a boarding house now, says there's a woman there keeping books for a grain company. Said I might be fit for that. Harlan finished chewing before speaking. Would you go? I don't want to leave this place, she said. But I want to know I could. That I'm not stuck anymore. He nodded once. You're not. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. What about you? You ever think of stopping somewhere? He leaned back. I think about it more now. You wouldn't miss the long rides? Not if I had something worth staying for. She didn't reply right away. Outside, the wind shifted, sending flakes spinning against the glass. She reached for the needlework on the bench, picked up the shirt she'd been mending and threaded her needle again. You ever think about what a home is supposed to feel like? She asked, not looking up. He watched her hands as she worked. It isn't the walls. No, she said, drawing the thread through. It's who you can breathe with. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It settled around them like the snow, soft and certain. Later, Harlan stepped outside to fetch more wood. The door had only just closed behind him when Etta came down the stairs, her shawl wrapped tight over her shoulders. I've seen the way he looks at you, she said, her voice quiet. Beatrice folded the shirt in her lap. It's different. He's not one to wander in and out. Men like that, they don't give their eyes away easy. Beatrice ran her thumb along the edge of the fabric. I don't know what I'm doing. You're building something, Etta said. One piece at a time. That night, Harlan didn't sleep in the barn. They had cleared a second cot in the spare room, its frame creaking under his weight as he lay back with his hands behind his head. Beatrice stood in the doorway, her hair unbraided, loose over her shoulders. I don't need the cot, she said. He sat up slowly. You sure? She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. I'm sure. He rose, met her halfway across the floor. She touched his face, fingertips light against the line of his jaw. He waited, still as ever, eyes steady on hers. I want to be with someone who sees me, she said. I do. She kissed him, and he kissed her back, not with urgency but with something anchored and deep, the kind of touch that said, I'm here, and I'll stay. They lay together that night not in hunger or haste, but in quiet understanding. Their hands moved with care, learning the contours of one another's skin like they had time, like the world had paused just for them. The snow fell heavier outside, but the room stayed warm. In the morning, she woke to the sound of him lighting the stove, boots already laced, shirt half buttoned. She pulled the quilt tighter and watched him from the bed. "You're always up early," she said. "There's work to do." She smiled, the kind that felt new on her face. "Don't fix everything before I get up." He looked back at her, his mouth twitching into something rare and unguarded. "I'll leave you the hard parts." Beatrice rose, wrapped herself in her shawl, and stepped into the day beside him. They went out together across the snow-covered yard toward a future not yet written but no longer feared. By early spring, the station had begun to change. Etta had remarried a freighter who brought lumber down from the Shoshone slopes, and she'd left the house in Beatrice's care with a quiet blessing and a key wrapped in linen. The young boy who'd once chopped wood out back now ran errands for the grain store in town, and his younger sister, barely 12, stayed on to help with laundry and eggs in exchange for meals and a cot in the attic. Beatrice kept the ledgers now, not just for the boarders but for passing wagons and the grain drivers who bunked down when the roads turned to mud. She ordered supplies through the telegraph clerk in Lander and kept a small tin of receipts in the drawer beside the stove. She didn't need permission for any of it, and no one asked if she had it. Harlan added a lean-to the side of the barn. He built it by hand using pine he split himself, the beams planed smooth with a drawknife he'd carried since boyhood. The lean-to held tools, gear, and a cot of its own for when the ranch hands passed through and needed shelter. He never said much while he worked, but Beatrice could tell the labor settled something in him. One morning, she brought him a tin of coffee while he was sanding the doorframe. "You ever imagine raising animals?" she asked, setting the cup on the sawhorse. He straightened, brushing sawdust from his palms. "Cattle or chickens?" "Neither. I meant horses." He looked at her. "I know how to manage accounts. I can track feed, tend to young stock. And you know how to handle a horse better than most men I've met. It's something we could do together." Harlan rubbed the back of his neck, considering. "You thinking of breeding or training?" "Both. There's a family near Riverton who sends their colts south every year for breaking. I asked around. They'd pay fair coin to keep them closer." He looked at the barn, then back at her. "You already spoke to them?" "I sent a letter." She met his eyes. "I wasn't going to say anything unless I was sure." He lifted the cup, took a sip, then nodded once. "It's a good idea." Beatrice smiled, slow and certain. "I want to build something that lasts." That night, they sat on the porch steps, the sun bleeding low over the hills. The sky was streaked with violet and orange, the kind of dusk that made the land look like it was holding its breath. Harlan's hand rested against hers, their fingers just barely touching. "I used to think I didn't belong anywhere," she said quietly, "that I'd always be running or hiding. You're not either now." "No," she said, "I'm not." He turned toward her. "I wasn't sure I'd ever stop moving either. I didn't know what it would feel like to stay. And now," he reached over and took her hand fully in his. "Now I know." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that until the stars blinked into view. 2 weeks later, they married in the parlor of the old station house. There were no guests besides the grain driver's wife, who served as witness, and the preacher from Lander, who made the ride out with a dust-covered book and a voice like river stone. Beatrice wore a simple dress of deep green and pinned her hair in a twist behind her neck. Harlan wore his cleanest shirt and tied a ribbon of red around his wrist, a Lakota custom to mark new beginnings. When the vows were spoken and the preacher gone, they stood in the quiet of the kitchen, the window open to the sound of wind in the cottonwoods. Beatrice turned to him, arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek resting against his chest. "I never thought I'd call anything mine," she whispered. "You're not alone in it anymore." They built the horse paddock that summer, cleared a new pasture behind the barn, and by autumn, 2 young Maras grazed in the field like they'd always belonged there. Each morning, Beatrice rose before the first light to feed and tend, and Harlan joined her without needing to be called. They worked side by side, their rhythm easy, their silences full of understanding. In the evenings, she read aloud from a book of natural remedies while Harlan carved handles for the tack tools. Sometimes they spoke of the future, of a second barn, of the possibility of children, of the long winters and the work they'd share. They never raised their voices. They never needed to. One day in late September, as they rode out to check the fence line at the far edge of their land, Beatrice pulled her horse to a stop and looked across the hills. "This is more than I ever let myself imagine," she said. Harlan followed her gaze. "It's only the beginning." She turned toward him, her eyes bright in the slanting light. "I know." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, her fingers warm against his. They sat there for a long while, the wind brushing through the grass, the horses quiet beneath them. And in that stillness, with the sun dipping behind the far ridge and the land stretching wide and open before them, they knew they had found what neither had dared to hope for. Not just safety, not just survival, but home. Together. Always.